Hello friends, welcome back to Digitalk and part 3 of SOA. In part 2, I said that I am going to cover the installation of SOA in part 2, but there is a slight change in the plan. In part 3, I am going to cover some more basic concepts of SOA, specifically which is related with the deployment and configurations. And one item in that is SOA folder, and second is some deployment options, and then the navigations in the EM console. As I said in part 1 and 2, when we go for the deployment of composites in SOA, we do it from the EM console, or we also call it as a Fusion Middleware control. Okay. And apart from that, we have a different options for the deployment. When we go for the deployment of composites, so there are different navigations. That means you have a different options for the deployment. So I'm going to explain that all, okay, with the screenshot of the EM console. And then I'm going to cover the basic concept of SOA folder. So let us have a small recap. Okay, what we have covered in part 1 is introduction to SOA. In part 2, we had covered the key components of SOA. What are the key components? And along with that, we have covered the SOA composite and the architecture of composite. Okay, so now what we are going to cover in part 3 is more about SOA composite application, introduction to the SOA infrastructure application, introduction to SOA folders, and then composite deployment options. So now let us begin with the SOA composite application. So we deploy application in SOA Suite in the form of composite application. So this we have discussed in the part 2 as well in big detail. Okay, and with a comparison with the WebLogic. Okay, so for example, when we go for the deployment in WebLogic, okay, then we have a archive file in the form of var, jar, or EAR, okay, that we deploy from the admin console, right? Now, when we compare with the SOA, how we do the deployment of SOA composite is, for that we have to log into EM console, which is also called the Fusion Middleware control. And the SOA composite, which we deploy on via EM console, is also called a SOA archive or SAR file. So we deploy SOA composite application from Oracle Enterprise Manager console, which is also called the Fusion Middleware control. So now what is SOA composite application? So if you have gone through the part 2 of the SOA, okay, there we have discussed about the SOA key component in detail. What are the service component? What are the binding components? If you have not gone through that one, I will strongly recommend to just go through my part 1 and 2, okay, to get the complete understanding of service component and binding components. In case you haven't gone through that one, then let me explain you. When we talk about the SOA service component, then in the service component, we have a mediator, we have the BPEL process, business process execution language. We have the BPMN process, which is installed along with the BPM. If we have installed the BPM along with the SOA suite. Apart from that, we have a human task. Apart from that, we have the Spring for integration Java interfaces. If you want to integrate the Java interfaces with SOA composites, SOA applications, and along with that, we have a business rule. So we have discussed in detail about each and every component, what is the role of each and every component in SOA. But all these are called the service components. Mediator, BPEL process. So BPMN, as I explained, that it is a separate product. If you wanted to use that functionality, then you can install that along with the SOA suite, and then you can have an integration with SOA. Okay, and then human task, Spring for integration Java interfaces, and then we have a business rule. So these are called the service component in SOA. So apart from service component, you have binding components. So what are binding components? There are two type of binding components. One is services and second is references. So SOA is an orchestration platform, right? That is used to integrate multiple technologies. That means you have multiple sources, you have multiple targets where SOA is receiving the data from the sources, and then it is sending the data to your target along with doing certain kind of a transformations in between, right? So that means you have an entry point, and then your SOA is doing the processing, and then you have an exit point. So all the entry point in SOA or your SOA component application is called the services, and all the exit points from where the data is going to the outer world or to the downstream systems is called the references. Okay, so that means in SOA we have two kind of binding component. One is services to receive the data in SOA composite application, and then to send references to send that data to the downstream applications. So altogether, in a nutshell, we can say that in a SOA composite, we have two components. One is service component, and when we talk about service component, then it could be a mediator, it could be a BPL process, it could be BPMN process if you are using the BPM suite. Along with that, it could be a human task, a Spring for integration Java interfaces, or business rule. So it may be possible that you are SOA composite using all of the component, or or it may be that one or two component that is your SOA composite is using. Okay, and along with that, you will have a binding components. And inside the binding components, we have two major components that is called services and references to receive the data and to send that data to downstream systems. Okay, so these are the two major components in your SOA component. So if you want to be an expert in SOA, then you must have to clear on the SOA composite architecture. What exactly is SOA composite? What are the different components inside your SOA composite? Okay, and then how it works. So when we talk about the SOA composite application, in a nutshell, you can say these components are assembled into a single SOA composite application. Having the component assembled into one unit of SOA deployment, the application greatly simplifies the management and lifecycle of SOA application. Right, because you have a multiple service component and then you have a different kind of a binding component, because as I said, that SOA is an orchestration platform where you are receiving the data from multiple sources, sending the data to multiple targets. So all these kind of functionalities that you can develop and then pack inside a single composite application. Now, what is SOA archive SAR file? The SOA archive is a SOA archive deployment unit. Whatever the code that we have developed, it is archived in a form that is called SAR format, which is a jar file. So a SAR file is a special jar file that requires a prefix of SCA. For example, SCA order booking composite revision 1.0 jar. So SCA is a SOA composite application. Okay, so whenever we deploy the application, we follow this kind of a syntax in SOA where when we create the jar file of our composite, then we started that application name with SCA, which is called SOA composite application, but that is not an hard and fast rule. The SAR file is deployed to the service infrastructure. So when we are going for the deployment of our composite, then as I said, we deploy it from the EM console or Fusion Middleware console. So once we'll go there for the deployment, then you will see an option called service infrastructure. And we have to deploy every composite inside our service infrastructure. So this is I'm going to explain in next few slides what exactly is service infrastructure. And the SAR packages service components and Oracle mediator routing into a single application. That means SAR, as I said, it is a package of all of the service component along with the binding components. Now, deploy and managing SOA composite application. Now, what are the different options for deploying the SOA composite and what are the related configurations of that? Okay, so when we go for the deployment of SOA application, then okay, we have three kind of options for deployment. The one, you are doing the deployment of a new application. That means you have got a new code, new composite from the developers, or maybe you are a developer, and then that you are deploying a new composite file. Okay. Apart from that, there could be a revision of a certain code. Okay. For example, if today you have a code or composite application which you have deployed with version 1.0, tomorrow you have some kind of a changes in your code. Okay. And that you may want to test some certain functionalities with certain limited number of users. Okay. You don't want to give exposure to that application to the outer world. So you can have a different version of same application can be deployed in SOA. That means in SOA, you have a feature where you can deploy the different versions of same composite application. Okay, there could be multiple versions of the same composite application. Third option is that you can deploy a zip file as well. So instead of deploying the one single file, you can have multiple SAR files or jar files. You can club together in a zip file and then you can do the deployment all together, right? For example, you have multiple versions of a particular application and then you can deploy all with the help of a zip file. Okay, and out of all of the files, if you have a multiple versions of a composite application, out of all, you have to define one application as the default application. If you have a 4 version of the same application, then out of 4, you have to define one application as the default application. Okay. Now, SOA deployment of composite. So now 3 major components here. Introduction to SOA infrastructure application. As I said in my previous slide, okay, when we go for the composite deployment, we do the deployment from the EM console and we do the deployment on SOA infrastructure application, right? And apart from that, when we go for the deployment of SOA composite application, we have to select a folder. That means there is a SOA folder as well, and then composite deployment options. So let us start with the SOA infrastructure application and SOA folder. So if you are not clear on the architecture of SOA, let me tell you, SOA is a Java-based application, right? Which is developed and then deployed on top of WebLogic Server. So that means the base application server for your SOA Suite is the WebLogic Server. So SOA Suite is a application which is developed in Java and deployed on top of WebLogic Server. So whenever we go for the installation of SOA Suite, what we do is first we install the WebLogic, which is called the as an infrastructure. Okay, Fusion Middleware infrastructure in terms of Fusion Middleware. And once our Fusion Middleware infrastructure, which is a WebLogic version, which is installed, and then on top of that, we install the SOA. So why we install it on top of that? Because it is deployed on the WebLogic server. That means it will create some managed servers. It will create some data sources. It will create some GMS queues, which is required for the functionality of your SOA application. And then it will deploy the SOA application on top of the managed server it will create. Okay. So on the screen, you can see that the application, SOA Infra application is displayed as with the name SOA-Infra and the status is active. That means this is a screenshot of my SOA Suite, which is already installed. And this is the status of my SOA infrastructure application. More than 90% of functionalities in SOA is done by this particular application, which is a SOA infrastructure. If this application is down or not accessible, that means your complete SOA is down. So SOA infrastructure is a Java enterprise compliant application running in WebLogic Server. It manages composites and their lifecycle service engines and binding components. So as I said, when we go for the deployment of SOA composite from the EM console, we deploy it on top of SOA infra, right? That means the complete end-to-end management of my composites is done by the SOA infra application. So you deploy SOA composite application designed in Oracle JDeveloper to a SOA folder of your choice in SOA infrastructure. So apart from that, once you go for the deployment of SOA composite, you have to select a folder. Okay, so I will tell you what is the reason of selecting the folder or creating the folders when we go for the deployment of composite in the next screen. Okay, so one of the basic reason is that we can deploy multiple applications composite in SOA, right? So we group all of the composites, or you can say all of the some related composite in a SOA folder for easy management. Now, what is the meaning of easy management? So you can deploy SOA composite application into separate sections of SOA infrastructure known as SOA folders. So deploying to SOA folders enable you to logically group SOA composite and perform bulk lifecycle management tasks on large number of composites. That means if you have a large number of composites and you want to do certain kind of operations in certain number of composites all together, okay, then we have to define a SOA folder, and then we have to club the SOA composite applications in a particular folder. For example, I have 10 applications, those are related. And whenever I'm going for the deployment and then redeployment or to start or stop the composite, for that you can do it inside a single folder. That means you deploy all the composite inside a single folder. And then with the help of that folder, you can do all the operations all together for all of the composites. So at least one folder is required for deploying SOA composite application. That means whenever you are going for the deployment, you have to define a folder for your application, for your composite application, right? But if you are not defining any folder, then there is a default folder is defined for each and every composite with the name default. That means it is not necessary to create a folder. Okay, and if you are not creating any folder, then there will be a default folder with the name default will be assigned to your composite. So folder option is mandatory, but creating a folder is not necessary because a default folder will be assigned to your composites. Okay. So SOA folders are separate sections of your SOA infrastructure that enable you to logically group the composite application for easy management. So what we are doing is that we are grouping all the composite all together for easy management. Now, what is the meaning of easy management? Deploy SOA composite applications into a SOA folder using Oracle Enterprise Fusion Middleware Control. Oracle JDeveloper scripting commands or and command. That means you have multiple options for the deployment. Either you do for the Enterprise Manager console, you can use the scripting with the help of WLST and commands, and maybe from directly from the JDeveloper. There are a lot of options for the deployment. So access the folder and its deployed composite using the SOA folder tab on the SOA infrastructure page. So how you can access it, that I will show in the next few screens. Once you log into EM console, then you have to go to SOA infrastructure. Okay, and then after that, once you go to there, then you will see a folder option, and then by selecting a particular folder, what all the specific operations that you can perform is start all composites, shut down all composites, undeploy all composites, retire all composites, activate all composites, and list all composites. That means what you are doing is that you have selected a particular folder, and when I'm saying start all composite, that means you are starting all the composite that is reside inside that particular folder. Okay, this will not impact the other composite which is deployed inside the other folders. But make sure if you haven't defined any folder, if you are using the default folder, and if you go to restart all the composites or to deploy and deploy the composites, okay, then it will be applicable for all the composite because all are defined inside the default folder, right? So now you can see the navigation once you log into your EM console. Okay, sometime I saw that many engineers get confused about the different kind of a navigation options that is displayed on the EM console. So once you log into your EM console, okay, after that the first screen that you will see as a WebLogic domain. So this is the configuration of your WebLogic domain where you will see the different kind of a managed servers and running in your domain, machine name, cluster, status of your managed servers, and the status of your cluster and deployments. Okay, so by default, the first screen that you will see after the login to EM console, that is a WebLogic domain console, right? After that, you have to click on the hamburger menu. So these are the three horizontal lines that you're seeing. This is also called a hamburger. So once you will click on the hamburger, okay, then there would be another menu will be opened, right? Inside that you will see a folder with name SOA. Once you will click on that, okay, once you will expand that, you will see all of your SOA managed server will be displayed inside that one. In my case, I have only one SOA server, so it is displaying only SOA server 1 because this is the managed server name for SOA. If you have a multiple SOA servers in the cluster, that it will display all of the servers here. And what it is displaying in front of server name is SOA-infra. So that means this is the default SOA infrastructure application, which I called as a heart of your SOA, right? So now you have to click on your SOA infra. So if you have a multiple managed servers in the cluster, that it will display the entry SOA infra for each and every server. Okay, and whatever the configuration that you are doing for any one of the SOA infra, it will be applicable for all. Okay, it will be applicable for all of the SOA infra application because the same application is deployed across the cluster. So whatever the configuration changes that you will do for SOA infra for one server, it will be applicable for all of the servers. So once you will click on your SOA infra application, okay, this is the screen that you will see in front of you. Now here you can see that the default menu is changed to SOA infrastructure from WebLogic domain. So what I said is by default, when you log into EM console, the first screen you will see the EM WebLogic domain. And once you will click on the SOA infra, then you will see the SOA infrastructure instead of WebLogic domain, right? And there is a drop box of in front of SOA infrastructure, and there are a lot of options inside that one that we will cover in the next part. Okay, next few lectures. And apart from that, you will see there are different options on the screen like the dashboard, SOA folders, deployed composites, flow instances, and error hospitals, right? So one first is the dashboard, which will give you a short summary of your domain, okay, with some options that we will cover in some next few lectures. Apart from that, the second option that you will see as a SOA folders. So this folder I was talking about, that means when you will go, once you will go for the deployment of SOA composite, then you have to select the SOA folder option. And that means you have to deploy your SOA composite inside a particular SOA folder. So if you wanted to deploy your application inside a SOA folder, or in another way, you can say whenever you are going for a deployment of your SOA composite, for that you have to go to SOA folders. And once you will click on SOA folder, then there would be a default uh, option that you will see on the screen. And along with that, there is a drop box. So default is the default folder that is created by default by the SOA. Okay, and once you will click on the drop box in front of default, okay, then if you have created some other SOA folders for your composite, then all the folders will be displayed here. right? So if you wanted to deploy your application inside a particular folder, then you can click on the drop box in front of default, select your folder, okay, and then you will get the same screen where you will see the option deployed composites. Okay, and once you will click on the deploy composite, then you will see the composite control button, and then once you will click on the composite control, then you will see a lot of options: start up all, shut down all, activate all, retire all. That means if you will select any of the option, all of the composites that is inside the folder that you have selected, it is applicable for all. Okay, so in my case, I have deployed my application, which is on the screen, simple approval, which is I have deployed inside the default folder. Okay. Now, apart from that, if you will click on the deploy composites, so inside that you will see the deployment, and once you will click on the deployment drop box, you will see two options: deploy to this SOA folder and deploy all from this folder. That means if you wanted to deploy your application, composite application, to a particular folder, then you have to click on SOA infrastructure, then click on SOA folder, then select your folder. Okay, default in my case, then click on deployed composite, and then inside that click on deployment, and then select deploy to this SOA folder. Once you will click on deploy to this SOA folder, then it will open a next screen for the deployment where you have to select the file and then click on the deploy. That will you cover in the deployment lecture, right? And now to manage folders. Now, when you're creating the SOA folder, okay, then you have option to manage that folders as well. Okay, and there are two options for managing your SOA folders. The one is from the SOA infrastructure menu. From SOA infrastructure menu, you can select the manage SOA folders. Second is from the SOA node in the target navigation tree. You can expand the SOA node, right click on the SOA infra, and then manage SOA folders. So let me show you one by one. So this is that I have shown you. Once you will click on the hamburger, and then you will see a folder with name SOA. Inside that you will see all of the SOA server entries. Okay, and the application name would be same, which is SOA-infra. So here in this screen, you are seeing two managed server for SOA because I have two managed servers here in my cluster. Okay, so click on SOA folder, and then after that, click on SOA infra for any of the server. Then you will see a SOA infrastructure Dropbox. Click on the SOA infrastructure Dropbox, and then click on manage SOA folders. By this, you can manage your folders. Second option, you can right click on any of your SOA infra and then click manage SOA folders. So these are the two options for managing the SOA folders. Right. So the manage SOA folder page display the following details. What exactly it is displaying? A utility for searching for a specific folder. That means you will a search box. If you have multiple folders, you can select any specific folder there. Links for creating, deleting, and editing SOA folders. If you wanted to create, delete, or edit any of the existing SOA folder, or want to create new folder, you want to delete any folder, then the option you will see there. A composite control list for starting up, shutdown, activating, retiring all composite in selected folder, which I have shown you in the previous screens. Once you will click on SOA folder, then you will see all of the options there. A deployment list for deploying to this folder or undeploying for all from this folder. This again I have shown you in the previous screen. Once you are inside the domain, your SOA folder, then you will get an option to deploy inside that particular folder. And the table that lists each folder. That means you will a screen. You will get a screen with tabular format where it will display all of the folders which is there. Right. So now this is the screen that you can see when you will click on the manage SOA folders. And what all the options that you are seeing there is create, delete, edit. And once you will click on composite control, start up all, shut down all, activate all, retire all, and then would be a deployment tab, and there would be a search tab for searching a particular folder. So with the help of that, you can search a particular folder. With the help of deployment tab, you can deploy your composite inside this particular folder which you have selected. Okay, and then composite control, and then create a new folder, delete the existing folder, or edit the folders. So in the screen that you are seeing, I have two folders. But one is the default and second is the shipping, right? So the default one is which is come by default with the SOA, and the shipping folder I have created, okay, for my some specific applications. Okay, so these are the options: search, create, composite control, and deployment. Now, what are the different options for the deployment of a SOA composite application? So to deploy the app composite, you have four options in your SOA. That means you can do the composite deployment with the help of four options. The first one is from the SOA infrastructure menu. So I have shown you what is the SOA infrastructure menu. Then after that, you have to click on SOA folder and then deployment and deploy option. Second is from the SOA folder in the navigator. Right click on the SOA infra, select SOA deployment and then deploy. Third one is from the SOA infrastructure homepage, where you will click the deployed composite tab, and then the composite table will, from there you have to select the deploy. The fourth one from the SOA composite menu. So they are the four options for the composite deployment. You can do the deployment using any of the option. And let me show you one by one all of the screen where exactly it is. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 options for that. Now this is the first option. Once you will click on the SOA infrastructure menu, okay, then you will see a SOA deployment. And once you will see the SOA deployment, then you can select the deploy option. This is the first one for the deployment. Second is right click on the SOA infrastructure. After right click, you can select SOA deployment and then click on the deploy tab. Third option is once you have clicked on your SOA infrastructure, then after that you have to click on the deployed composite and then you have to select the deploy option. And the fourth one, click on the SOA infrastructure and then home. And inside home, you will see the deployed composites. So these are the four options. Okay, so once you will click on the deploy composite, then it will show you the Dropbox option, deploy to this folder. Similarly, when you will select any of the option for the deployment, there you have to mandatorily select a folder or inside which folder you are going to deploy your composite application. Right. So in the next part, what we are going to cover is that we will see that how we can do the deployment of SOA composite from the EM console. Thanks for watching this video and stay tuned for the next video.